everyone, it's Zoe here. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be talking about the logic games section of the LSAT. I get a lot of questions asking about how I scored better on specific sections of the LSAT, so I'm going to try to break down the logic games section pretty quickly in this video. So for starters, full transparency, when I took my diagnostic test, I missed almost every question on the logic games section. I think I maybe was able to finish the first game, but I literally didn't have enough time to get to the rest of them, and by the time I took my actual LSAT, I was getting an almost perfect score or perfect score on every single practice logic games section that I took. So hopefully this video is helpful because I went from nothing to a lot. So yeah. So the first thing that was really helpful for me was just changing my mindset on how I thought about the logic game section. And honestly, I started thinking about the logic game section more of like a math section than a reading and comprehension section. The best way for me to describe logic games is honestly like algebra, but with words instead of numbers. And that made it easier for me to understand because then I started solving the problems as if they were math problems with single solutions rather than, oh well, it could be this or it could be that, which I think made me much more accurate when I began taking more practice tests. The single most effective strategy for me was using an LSAT prep book that really broke down the different types of games that you can expect to see on the LSAT. And I used the LSAT trainer for my book, but I'm sure a ton of books out there will break this down pretty clearly. I really did like the LSAT trainer just because it was easier for me to understand. So that's the first thing that you really need to get in order to be successful on the LSAT. There's a finite type of games that you could see on the LSAT. So really what your focus needs to be is learning how to do every type of game that you're going to see, not necessarily mastering every game that you come across when you're taking your practice test. Because if you're just learning the games itself, you might just memorize the answers, you might memorize the order that you see things, and that's not going to be helpful for you in the long run. You really have to memorize the formula because, like I said, it is closer to math than anything else. And I think adding that mathematical definition helps make it more clear instead of just guesswork. Before I go any further, let me just break down what you're going to see on the logic game section. If you're watching this video, you probably already know this, but the logic game section consists of 4 different games. So you'll get a question stem that has 6 to 8 questions that go along with that stem. Pretty much every practice test and the real test, the first game is going to be an ordering or sequencing type of game. So you have to figure out what order the subjects go in. This is the type of questions that you're for sure going to see on every exam, and it's usually going to be the first one. So this needs to be the one that you are most confident with and that you can fly through as quickly as possible. Before you do anything else, you want to make sure that you can do ordering and sequencing logic game sections. Some people might recommend that you spend an equal amount of time on each game and that's how you pace yourself, but the reality is the games often get harder as they go along. So you want to be able to do the first one in less than 5 minutes so that when they do get harder, you can spend more time on those. Aside from linear or sequence or ordering, you can also see grouping type of games, you can see in and out type of games, you can see patterns, or you can see mapping. Those are the top types of games you're going to see. I'm not going to go too much into detail on those just because I think you can look them up and that would be more efficient for your time, but this is what I recommend for learning how to do each game. So first you want to familiarize yourself with the type of game that you're working with. So if it's an ordering game, I'm going to make sure I read the definition on what an ordering game is. I'm going to make sure I understand the goal of what ordering games want you to do. And after I do that is when I'm going to start practicing. After I practice with 3 or 4 games, if I'm not getting faster by that point, then something is not clicking for me. Each game really should be a little bit easier if you're doing the most efficient route. And if you're not doing the most efficient route, then you're learning how to do things inefficiently. So regardless of if you're taking a real test or if you're taking practice tests, I record the amount of time it takes to do each game and not each whole entire like logic game set, because that's really going to help you see where your flaws are, what sections you're struggling more with. Some games I got a lot more easy than others, so like there are games called in and out games that I really struggled with. So even though I went through my book, I read the definition, I understood the goal of the game, it was still hard for me to execute like that knowledge. So when I came to a problem like that, what I would do is I would go on YouTube and I would type the question stem, and a lot of times there would be someone on YouTube explaining that exact question, and that was very helpful for me because they would talk through their answer, they would show you exactly how and why they did everything, and I would just repeat that video until it made sense to me. Repetition really is key because you're not going to start thinking like someone just by watching it one time. You have to watch these things multiple times if you want it to become natural to you. And then after doing that, I would try it on my own, see if I could execute the same things that they did. And then the true test was doing a completely different game that still utilized the same techniques. At the end of the day, there still might be a type of game that you know you really struggle with and you just don't have time before your test to really get to know it. If that's the case and you come across that game on your actual LSAT, save that test section for last. Every question counts the same amount, so you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the easy points first. If you know you are better at some games over other games, you might miss 6 questions instead of 10 because you didn't have time to do the one that's easy for you at the end. Also remember that progress is not linear, so if you're not getting faster every single time you take a practice, that's totally normal and that's totally expected. In general, like, it's definitely a progression, but the progression more so goes like that than like that. So know that everything you're doing is counting and is helping you. And if a method isn't working for you, recognize that you probably aren't the problem. The way that you're learning is probably the problem. Logic games is my favorite section because it is the most learnable. Unlike logic, reasoning, and reading comprehension, at least for me, it was hard for me to improve on those because there wasn't really anything for me to learn. It was just really how I thought about things. Logic games, though, I truly believe that everyone can do great if they learn the material and if they practice. Also, I probably should have said this earlier, but you really do have to learn to diagram for logic games. Diagramming is the single most effective tool that you could possibly use when doing logic games. And what diagramming is basically is like drawing out the stem and then being able to fill in missing pieces based on the information that they give you in the questions. You have to be able to do it fast and you have to be able to understand your own symbols for yourself. I love the LSAT trainer. Again, you would think they were sponsoring me at this point, but they did a really good job of teaching me how to diagram, teaching me symbols that made sense, but also like emphasizing the fact that it also just needed to make sense to me and I didn't need to do things just because they said this is how they do it. But you can't keep all that information in your head. If you're trying to keep that information in your head, that's like you're surely just gonna mess up. You can't just read the question stem and then go straight to trying to answer the questions. Like that's just not, it's not gonna work. It's simply too much information for anyone to hold in their head at one time. So when you're reading the question stem, you really do have to draw it out. Don't get too attached to a picture in your head if you aren't for sure that that is exactly how it looks on paper. Diagramming also goes hand in hand with understanding the different types of games. Based on the type of game they give you, you should know how you're going to diagram. Your diagrams don't have to be pretty, they don't have to make sense to anyone else. Like you can scratch, you can start over, do whatever you need to make it make sense to you. At the end of the day, you can do all this practice and they still might throw you a curveball in the exam. Try not to let it scare you. Hopefully this video has been helpful or at least encouraging. If you have any other questions about the logic game section, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I will link the book that I talked about in the description. And I hope if you're preparing to take the LSAT, you get the score you want. Yeah, have a great day. I'll see you next time.